This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of The Life of Yogananda. Our guest today, Lama Surya Das. He is the author of Awakening the Buddha Within, his latest book, Make Me One with Everything. He is a very learned Buddhist from the Tibetan tradition, and thank you so very much for taking the time to come on with us today, Surya.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Surya, before we begin, I'm going to make a commercial announcement. I'm looking forward to being with you in Lexington, Mass. On May 29th, where we're going to be on a panel together.
That's May 29th, 2018.
2018, right.
Yes. If anybody's interested, that's 33 Marriott Road in Lexington at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library in Lexington, Mass.
Very good, and they can find out details at either of our websites.
Right, in Lexington, Mass.
So let's begin. You are one of the better known of the American Buddhist teachers. You're a New Yorker by birth. Tell us a bit about the history of what brought you to Tibetan Buddhism and how you became a Lama.
Well, Lamas have been around for a long time in our culture. As you point out in your Vedantic history, going back to the time of Emerson and Thoreau and the Lotus Sutra and et cetera back then. And I lived near where they lived, so I think about these things too. In 1919, Ogden Nash, the great poet, American poet and lyricist, wrote in the New Yorker magazine, of all places, with one L, he's a priest. With two L's, he's a beast. Yama. But I'll bet a pair of silk pajamas, there aren't any 3L Lamas.
That's great.
So the Dalai Lama has been known to the West since the 1800s, and especially in the 1900s. And of course become well known in his current incarnation and Nobel Prize and all. And Tibet has always been a utopian vision, kind of, the high ground, something we aspire to, many of us in the mystic traditions, but not that well known, hidden behind the Himalayas. So it's surprising that I got all the way there. But I was a peacenik in the 60s and marched for peace and against the war in Vietnam and things like that in college. And then when I graduated in 71, I went to India to seek God or truth or enlightenment. And I had realized that fighting for peace and being an enraged Buddhist wasn't where it was at, and killing in the name of God, as some people were talking about in certain parts of the world, wasn't where it's at. And I wanted to become more of an engaged Buddhist and be a peacemaker and a light bearer in this world, and at least find inner peace and wisdom myself. So I went to the Himalayas, and I was there most of the 70s and 80s and some of the 90s in ashrams and monasteries. I was in Nimkaroli Baba's Maharaji's ashram with Ram Das, Krishna Das, and the other Das brothers. That's where I got my name, Surya Das.
I was always...
light.
Okay.
Yes, from the same ashram.
No, I was not, but I know many people who were, and I wrote about it, and I always found it curious, and maybe you can shed some light on this. You answered one of my questions, which was how you got your name, because, Surya Das is very Hindu, and obviously Lama is Buddhist. But many people some people who were with Neem Karoli Baba and, Ram Das in the early 70s became Buddhist teachers, and others.
Well, when we were in India, we weren't really, there on fellowships to study Buddhism or Hinduism or comparative religions. Most of us were already done with school, and a few people like Dan Goleman were finishing their PhDs. He did his in Buddhism, actually, and psychology, Buddhist psychology. But it was not demarcated in India. We would go from one guru to another. When the monsoons fell, we'd go up into the mountains to get away from the monsoons. And in the winter, we'd go into the plains because the mountains were too cold. And so we'd end up with the different gurus and teachers, ashrams, meditation retreats, Sufi saints, Indian music sitar masters and dance masters in Benares on the banks of the Ganges, etc. And this was going on in the 60s and 70s. And of course, the Hare Krishna movement and the Rajneesh movement and the insight meditation, mindfulness movement, and Tibetan Buddhism and Dalai Lama and yoga and all these things came over again. Really like started to become popular in the 60s and 70s, thanks to, and you've written about this, Philip, thanks partly to the PR from people like Baba Ram Dass and his bestseller Be Here Now, and the Beatles spreading the word about their transcendental meditation, TM. Transcendental Meditation Guru Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in Rishikesh. The TM is still going and bringing meditation into schools even. So these things really picked up at that time, and many of us had left our pulpits, our churches, our synagogues, our atheistic, scientific, ambitious middle-class homes, and were seeking something. And many of us found it in the East. And then those teachers were bringing it to the West. Then some of us stayed there a long time and then were sent back or brought it back to the West and started what we now see as the meditation centers and meditation movement, mindfulness movement, the yoga movement, Sufi dance, Sufi movement, and other things, Tai Chi, Qigong, vegetarianism, acupuncture, and so on.
Right. Surya, let me ask you a question. I read something, actually just read it today in doing some additional research on you. And I didn't know this, but what I read was your best friend's girlfriend, Alison Krauss, was killed during the Kent State shootings. That was in Ohio back,
Yes.
in the, I think it was 1970. And after that, you began pursuing spirituality. How did that experience, that trauma, affect you, and how did it, and was that the final sort of like last
Yes.
straw that sort of pushed you into spirituality or spiritual pursuits?
Yes, good question. I grew up in New York and Long Island, and I'm Jewish on my parents' side, like you, Phil. But Buddhist
on your parents' side, I like that. Yeah.
By choice and inclination, and maybe past lives, as some of my Tibetan friends tell me. Who knows? I was a junior in high school in '70, and Allison was from Pittsburgh. She was at Kent State, and my best high school friend, Barry Levine, was at Kent State, and they were running together, holding hands away from the National Guard at that peace demonstration when the National Guard was ordered to fire, and they shot and killed 4 students. And that really turned my head around about radical politics and demonstrations and, just about life in the world. She was 19 and an artist, and we sort of thought we were going to grow up together and, have a future. And all of a sudden, in 1 minute, she was gone and dead, as were the others. And what people don't remember, due to the incipient racism still in this country, unfortunately, is that at Jackson State, something similar happened a few weeks later, and 4, 5, 6 students were killed, black kids, at Jackson State College in Mississippi, I think. So that turned my head around. I really started to think about, instead of fighting for peace and marching for peace, becoming peace and finding inner peace. And I met people like Ram Dass and Allen Ginsberg and others, Swami Satchidananda, some of the holy men and women of the time, and poets, and people who had been in India, and they talked about it, and it sounded good to me, and an alternative to the gray 50s and bourgeois post-war American lifestyle my parents brought me up to pursue. So after college, I went to Asia, and even in college, I started to look into Mahatma Gandhi's writing, and that led to Thoreau and Whitman and the Dalai Lama and so on, and writings about nonviolence, and that was very helpful. And I started to work on myself a little more through psychology and Gestalt workshops and yoga, and then I went to India And I thought, if you asked my late mother, she would say, and Jeffrey never came back. He's not even here now.
No, he is here now.
Go ahead, Phil.
He
Yeah.
was
But she had a
always
good sense
here
of
now.
humor about it. It was hard for them in the beginning, meaning the first 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But
my son, the Lama.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's your son doing? Oh, my mother would say, he's studying philosophy in Paris. Or he's studying philosophy in India.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, Surya, there's a lot of forms of Buddhism have come here, Zen and Vipassana and all the rest. You ended up in a Tibetan lineage, and I'm sure there's a story about that. Can you, for people in the audience who aren't familiar with the different forms, can you tell us briefly, like what is different about Tibetan Buddhism as compared to the Buddhism that has come to us through other parts of Asia, like Japan and Burma and so forth?
Buddha was a historical figure who lived from 563 to 483 AD. He had a long teaching career. He was enlightened when he was 29, so he taught for 45 years, unlike Jesus, who had a short career. And Buddhism spread wildly, meditation, nonviolence, and so on, all over the Indian subcontinent, which is huge, as big as Europe or bigger, and to Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Indonesia, meaning Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and of course to Tibet, Nepal, Mongolia, Japan, Korea, and so on. And then in recent centuries to the West. And wherever it went, it changed the society it entered, hopefully in a positive way, let's say, and let's assume, and also was changed and adapted, changed by the society it entered by adapting so it could fit in, so the rulers would accept it, and so on. So there are different color monastic robes, but the basics are the same. The goal is the same: awakening, enlightenment for all, inner peace, a more harmonious and peaceful world, protect the environment, and so on. Buddha himself was quite a social activist. He was the first to break the caste system in India, the horrific caste system, which still lingers on even today to some extent. He was the first to educate women en masse. You could look it up in history. Only the royal women or a few rich women would get educated by tutors until maybe 300, 200 years ago. He had quite an effect in his time, and as I said, he taught for 45 years after his great enlightenment, sitting under the bo tree in northern India outside Benares in Bodh Gaya. So every country kind of developed its own style of Buddhism, just like there's the Catholic Church in Italy is a little different than the Eastern Orthodox churches in Greece and Russia, even though they're Catholic, let's say. And it's different than the Protestant churches in Northern Europe and in America. And Buddhism is older than Christianity, so it has also evolved in the different countries with different styles and emphasis. So in India, in Tibet, and so on, Mongolia, Buddhism was quite elaborate, not unlike Hinduism, with many archetypal images, so-called gods and goddesses, although there's no real external gods or goddesses in Buddhist thought. In China and Japan, it developed into the Zen style, which was like a reform or a pendulum swing back to simplicity, wearing brown and black robes, not so much archetypal gods and goddesses and elaborate temples and rituals, more simplicity and meditation and the Zen arts. And in Southern Buddhism, in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, Burma, and Thailand, very monastic. So those are like the roots, those three groups, Southern and Northern and Zen Buddhism. And how it came to this country was with the immigrants who came from a lot of Chinese came to the West Coast to build the railroads, so they brought their Buddhism with them. A lot of Sanskrit scholars and Buddhists came to Europe, or Europeans studied it in India. The British owned India for the imperial period, and so they brought it back. Today, we see in American Buddhism's kind of melting pot of all of this, emphasizing meditation, gender equality, nonviolence, environmentalism, social activism, not so much ritual or cosmology about other lives and rebirth, not so much about other worlds, but sort of a practical and psychologically astute, trimmed down modern Buddhism. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's still some pockets of the old world Buddhism here. And when you see the Dalai Lama, you see, the Tibetans are a very old world culture that only encountered modernity in the 1950s, unlike Judaism and Christianity, which encountered modernity at the time of the Age of Reason and the Western Enlightenment, like in the 16, 17, 1800s. The Industrial Revolution changed everything, and universal education, which they didn't have in places like Tibet or Japan. So we have Buddhism in America, these Eastern Buddhisms from the different countries, like Zen Buddhism and so on. And then we have American Buddhism, which is syncretistic, or the teachers have experienced most of these traditions themselves, and try to put forth something practical that anybody can do, and also accommodate advanced people who want to go further. There's some monasticism, there's some ritual, there's some philosophy, but it doesn't emphasize that. And recently, the mindfulness movement has really picked up speed. As yoga took off in America without Hinduism, too much Hinduism attached to it, mindfulness has taken off without a secular mindfulness as a practice anybody can do and benefit from, without being a Buddhist or without being religious.
Right.
And so this has its pluses and minuses, but mindfulness is definitely a major part of the Buddhist path, regardless of what school.
Right. Surya, I wanted to ask you, whether we talk about a Vedic tradition of meditation or a Buddhist tradition of meditation in mindfulness now, for instance, most people that are exposed to it are exposed to, practicing it a few minutes once or twice a day. I read that, twice you completed a traditional 3-year meditation cloistered retreat at your teacher's Tibetan monastery. And also, I believe you run like a 100-day intensive retreat west of Austin or whatever. And, Phil and I have both been on meditation courses where for months at a time, where I would be spending personally 6-8 hours a day in meditation. I don't always find that much meditation easy. I'm not even convinced that doing that much meditation really speeds up what I would categorize as my evolution, my growth. Do you think those longer periods of meditation, like you've participated in, are real shots in the arm to your overall spiritual growth? And do you think they're appropriate to everyone, or do you think there are some people that that much meditation of any type is too much for?
I go along with you on this, Phil. Of course, it's a shot in the arm, but it's not for everybody. It's too much for many, and it's not absolutely necessary. And some of these ancient traditions are from times and places where there was no mobility, where there was no instant communications. If you went somewhere, it took you a few weeks or months to walk there or travel there in a cart. And so then you would stay there a long time. These days you can fly back and forth, and visit your parents or your family. I don't know if you can hold a regular job, but, there's a lot more social mobility. So I don't necessarily recommend my own meditation students to go to 3-year retreats.
Did you enjoy your 3-year retreats, and what were they like, your experiences?
I was prepared for our 3-year retreat, and it was one of the first in the West. It started in 1980, and the first one in the West was in 1976 in France, started by Kalu Rinpoche. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't always easy. It was monastic. We didn't have weekends or holidays. It was mostly silent. There was a lot of practice, some study, some yoga, a lot of chanting and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It could be streamlined, but the good news is, it's like, I don't know if this is a good example. I didn't go to law school. I didn't go to med school, but a lot of people, would say that so much of that is not absolutely needed or useful, but it's hard to know which part.
Right.
Now, Surya, it sounds like in your teaching, you draw from a variety of sources, not just the Tibetan tradition. And in your writing, certainly, you're very eclectic in the spiritual sources you draw upon. But you're mostly identified with not just Tibetan Buddhism, but Dzogchen.
Yes.
When people look you up and they see the word Dzogchen, they might not be familiar with it. So tell us what
Right.
Dzogchen is and why that emphasis.
Well, the first important thing about Dzogchen for your spiritual progress is how to pronounce it.
And spell
That's
it.
the first problem. Yeah, how do you spell it? It says in Tibetan D-Z-O. So that's not a sound we really have in English. Like a female yak, it's called a dzo. So it's Dzogchen. It means the innate or natural great perfection, that we're all Buddhas by nature, not Buddhists, God forbid. We're all Buddhas by nature, complete and, fitting in, and we only have to recognize who and what we are. It's only temporary obscurations that veil that fact. So that's different than the general Buddhist gradual path of many lifetimes and going through many different stages until enlightenment. Not to mention the fact that anybody can do it, that you can do it in one lifetime, that women can do it. Not every sect in the world agrees women could be priests, or women could be saints, or women could achieve the highest. So it's a radical and a naked awareness practice, not based so much in the rich pantheon of archetypal, I know I keep saying that, gods and goddesses, and the Himalayan pantheon, rites and rituals of philosophy and monasticism. It's much more an awareness practice, like self-inquiry, awareness of awareness, clear awareness, open awareness, meditation in all situations, practice. Of course, there's a few different practices in there, but Dzogchen is called the Summa, or the highest teaching of Tibetan Buddhism, and like Mahamudra, its sister practice, the ultimate perspective, Mahamudra, or Dzogchen, the natural great perfection, which points directly to our innate Buddha-ness, what we call Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, innate Buddha-ness that's Buddhists believe is in everyone and everything, all beings, not just Buddhists, not just religionists, not just human beings, but all beings endowed with this luminous Buddha nature, or inner light, clear light, we call it, Dharmakaya. And that's why nonviolence and vegetarianism, even in many cases, is desirable, although not required. Buddhism isn't very dogmatic about that stuff. You don't have to believe in rebirth to meditate and get enlightened, etc. You don't even have to be a Buddhist. Buddha said anybody could get as enlightened as the Buddha did by practicing such a path.
Right.
And that was
Surya,
radical 2,600 years ago, male or female.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, if you have somebody that were to contact you now, say somebody said, hey, Surya, I knew you back in the day, and I've been reading your stuff. I think it's fascinating. I've been working as an engineer for the last 40 years. I think a meditation is something that would be good for me. I should have started it a long time ago, but I know nothing about it, and I'd like to start now. Where do I start? What do I do? Where do I go? What would you recommend to them?
Well, I'd say that's a good start if you feel called or looking for something. And I might ask, why or what happened, and catch up a little. But in general, I recommend them to a few books. Of course, I'm an old book lover. These things can also be found, on audio and on YouTube. But a few books like My Awakening the Buddha Within, or Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Peace is the Way, or Miracle of Mindfulness, or Joseph Goldstein's basic book, Insight Meditation, or Sharon Salzberg's great book, Loving Kindness. These are basic Buddhist primers. and also to learn to meditate. Go to a meditation class, or retreat online, but actually do it, every day, daily-ish. Go to a retreat. I have one-day retreats. I just did a 2-day retreat, non-residential, in New York at the Open Center. All of us teachers, we travel around. We have retreats. They're very modestly priced. People are generally not turned away if they can't pay, especially students. We have 5-day and week-long retreats, as well as a 100-day retreat. The mindful people have 3 months. Barre, Massachusetts, that I recommend a lot, or Spirit Rock in Marin County. There's a lot of places you can go. There's a Buddhist university, Naropa University in Boulder, if you want to study, or your young person wants to study it, or get a BA or MA there, Buddhist psychology especially. There's a lot of ways to do it, but the main thing is to get a practice, to have some kind of awareness cultivation practice, to cultivate mindfulness rather than mindlessness and distraction. Day.
Surya,
cultivate mindfulness, meditation, yoga, something like that. Do the inner work, and then report back. Maybe find a spiritual friend or an elder or a teacher you can relate to, or a community to be part of. That's very helpful.
Surya, you mentioned the popularity of mindfulness practices and the secularization of techniques that had been associated with Buddhism. Is there concern in the American Buddhist communities similar to the concern people have about the secularization and potential dilution that comes with yoga being
yes.
So tell us about that. What are you concerned?
Right. Well, there's a definite concern. We all have our most of us, we all have our eye on it, and people find themselves in different places on the spectrum. But this is not new, and it's not just related to Eastern religions. There's great concern among the Orthodox Jews in the Old Country about American Jewry and Reformed and Conservative Jews and female rabbis, which, by the way, are not female rabbis not recognized by the Orthodox rabbis in Israel. So it's very much similar. There's great concern in the Catholic community, in the Vatican, and so on, about the Protestant sects. But that's a 200 or 300 years ago fight that's still going on. And then in America, about other Christian groups like the Quakers, the Mormons, the Christian Scientists, and so on. So this goes on all over the world in this cultural meeting place or marketplace. Here we're talking about the bridge or the cross-fertilization of East and West. So, of course, we're concerned about throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just having a few moments of mindfulness in the morning, like mental floss for mental hygiene, and nothing to do with spirituality, nothing to do with enlightenment, wisdom development, the mindful life rather than the mindless or worse, addictive life. Nothing to do with Buddhist values like unselfishness and generosity and enlightenment, basically. So it's similar to yoga. Yoga is fine for exercise or health, but there's 8-limbed yoga is the real yoga, and a well-rounded spiritual life, including service and generosity and ethics and energy yoga and devotional yoga and meditation yoga, Raja yoga, not just physical yoga, hatha yoga. So mantra yoga and bhakti, chanting yoga, and so on makes it a spiritual life. And yoga means union, so a well-rounded yoga life brings you to union with God or however you conceive it. So mindfulness alone is probably not enough. As the Dalai Lama always says, the essence of Buddhism is loving kindness, but what he really means is wisdom and compassion.
Right.
Very good.
Phil,
not just wisdom, not just enlightenment from the mind up, also mindfulness and kindfulness. How about that?
Good. I think those are extremely important points. Because so much now of what we see is an emphasis on meditation, on yoga for short-term, get stressful living.
Right.
But
short-term
to just teach somebody just that is unfair to them that there's a broader horizon there. Phil, any final questions you have or any final points you'd
Yes,
like to
I
make, Lama?
do. I do.
Yeah.
Surya.
Before we go on from that,
Yeah.
I would like to say, I don't know if it's exactly unfair to teach them that. It feels like people want and need something, and look at the young people's situation today, and the disillusionment with authorities, religious, political, whatever, parental. So I think a little of a good thing is a good thing, and it doesn't mean that's all. You can see it as doorways, gateways that they can follow up and go deeper, and just to present some of the facts in this discussion. You mentioned the 3-year retreats and the 90-day retreats and the 1-week retreats. There's also daily practice. Google, which is quite an institution in itself, it has a search inside yourself program founded by an engineer named Meng, who's well known as a jolly good fellow. That's what it says on his business card. And they have a search inside yourself program that's a mindfulness and loving kindness program. And Meng specializes in the 11 or the 19-second meditation.
Yeah, I mean, when I Surya, when I used to
couldn't it at least be 3 minutes or 1 minute?
When I used to teach TM,
you've done retreats. You did a 6-month mindfulness retreat. I said, how about 3 minutes, 1 minute? He said, Google engineers don't have that long. 19 seconds or 11 seconds is good if they do it every day.
Right. No, I mean, I agree. I mean,
be happy.
When I taught TM, a lot of people started it just as a way to release stress every day. But at the very least, you would give them a vision of possibilities. You may never follow up on this, but this is the starting point, and there's a lot more out there if you're interested.
Gateway.
And not, But Phil, go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, a lot of people turn to inner practice, and often in the name of Buddhism, and think that their spiritual lives would advance if they're detached from the world. You mentioned engaged Buddhism. These days, there's a lot to be concerned about in what is often dismissed as the world of Maya or illusion. How do you feel about using Buddhist principles and Buddhist practices as a kind of foundation for engagement in the world?
I think it's better than engagement in the world without a spiritual source or a spiritual resource or an inner center. Of course, it can get out of balance, but I think it's fine. Engaged Buddhism, probably coined by Thich Nhat Hanh or Sulak Shivaraksha of Thailand 50 years ago, seems like a new movement in Buddhism, but it's really not. As I said, Buddha was a social reformer. The Bodhisattva is a spiritual altruist and awakener. It's the model ideal of a Buddhist. So some outward work and some inner work, just like in the 8-limbed yoga, there's seva, service to God by serving the lowest, as well as Kundalini yoga and meditation and Hatha yoga and mantra yoga and devotion. So I think a balance. I think a lot of social activists burn out because there's always more suffering in the world, and you can never, solve it all. It's an imperfect world, worldliness or Maya, the illusory dreams, of material things. So you have to. I think Buddha's greatest teaching was the middle path, and that means moderation and appropriateness, balance.
Good.
Balance. So, balancing outer and inner, balancing alone and with others, balancing work and play, balancing head and heart. The head is like the office, the heart is like the home. So keep your priorities straight. And then social activists, if they had a more spiritual practice or base or community support, I don't mean financial, I mean like psychological and therapeutic and spiritual support among the community of activists, they would be less prone to burnout. And we know that's a big problem in helping professions as well as social activists. So I think engaged Buddhism is a good thing, and there's some great leaders of it. But the problem is when you become an enraged Buddhist. That's a little contradictory. That's like the old Middle East slogan, convert or die. I'm not sure that God or Allah is down with that.
Really?
He's probably down on it.
Right. Surya, thank you so very much for your time today. And again,
My pleasure.
His book, Awakening the Buddha Within, and the latest book, Make Me One with Everything. And Phil, want to
Using
mention
the
again when you'll be
punchline.
speaking together.
Yes. I'm very proud. I think my serious spiritual book is not that serious. It's the only one that has a punchline of a joke as the title. So yay me.
Very good.
The Jolly Lama.
The Buddha goes to the Catskills.
Always keep a sense of humor. Phil mentioned when your talk is
And I'll see you May
again.
29th in Lexington, Phil.
Lexington,
Mass. I'm looking forward to it. May 29th, 2018 in Lexington, Massachusetts. If you're curious, look at our...
We're going to talk. We're going to argue in public. We're going to joust.
Okay.
All right.
It'll be
Thank
fun.
you.
Thanks.